Now, the reason why I think that's funny, and you say, but John, would God do something like that? Well, let me ask you a question. Could God? Oh, no, God's not like involved in that. Well, let me tell you an iron chariot in the Old Testament with a guy named Barak involved in that one. It's found in Judges chapter 4, verse 15, and it talks about Sisera's army where they got stuck in the mud. Okay, and it says, quote, verse 15, the Lord discomforted Sisera and his chariots before Barak, so that Sisera lighted off his chariot and fled away on his feet. If you watch the video, you can go on YouTube, and actually that was just a short 25-second one. There's a 2-minute one, and then there's like a 6-minute one. You watch the 2-minute one, eventually you see Barak getting out of his iron chariot and walking off. It's like, oh, dude, that's pretty funny, you know? But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in. Well, anyway, I don't know how many realize this, but while he is on his way to Ireland, he had to shorten his trip because of a volcano that ends up forcing him away. And let me just read this to you. Obama, who had been scheduled to spend Monday night in Ireland, was forced to fly to London early because of the ash cloud. Last year's Icelandic eruption also forced a change in his schedule then, causing him to cancel a trip to Poland. And I don't know how many remember the one in November 9th of 2010 when he appeared before the world's largest Muslim country, Indonesia. And of all things, our president goes to Indonesia, the world's leader in Muslims, and stands up and rebukes the prime minister of Israel. President Obama condemned Israel for building, oh, listen to this horrible thought, 1,300 new apartments in Jerusalem. What a terrible thought. In Jerusalem, that's right. Saying that doing so was an obstruction to the peace process with the Palestinians. Prime Minister Netanyahu just so happens was in America when that happened. One of the news people put a microphone in his mouth and said, hey, what do you think about what our president just said about you and criticizing you? Immediately, Prime Minister Netanyahu says, Jerusalem is not a settlement. Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel. That was on November the 9th. Guess what, folks? The very next day, a deadly volcano erupts in Indonesia, forcing the president to flee the country. What's interesting is that particular mountain is called Merapi, and it means a mountain of fire. Now, why is that important? Well, because there's also in the Bible, when God first started appearing to Moses and to the children of Israel, he did so through a mountain of fire. And in that mountain of fire, he revealed himself as the God that changes not. This is the covenant-keeping God who made a covenant with Jews and the Jerusalem and Israel, and he will back it up. Amen? Now, I think it's interesting because right prior to this eruption, the EU made their vocal statement declaring that Jerusalem should be, here it is again, Jerusalem should function as the capital of both Israel and the Palestinian state, whatever that thing is. Of course, the foreign minister from Luxembourg says that the EU is, quote, very disappointed by the position of the Israeli government. I think I can say very clearly that Jerusalem is not Tel Aviv. Well, that's interesting. So now we got all these European nations saying you don't have a right to all this stuff. Well, 24 hours later, the first volcanic eruption took place. Meanwhile, while that's going on, the second biggest airline in Heathrow is known as BMI, which is a British airline. They removed, ladies and gentlemen, Israel from their electronic map on the airplane. You know, the airplane, when you're flying, most of this is international. There are some stuff here. You can see the map in front of you shows you where you're going, how fast you're going, what the wind speed is, the temperature, and it shows you a map there. Guess what they did? They said they did not want to offend the Muslims, so they took Israel off the map. Although all the other countries are there, they took Israel and said, we're just going to take you off the map. Well, that's kind of interesting because right while that was going on, the British advertising standards, now we're talking European nations here, folks. Very interesting why this would be a part of this. The British Advertising Standard Authority criticized Israel for including pictures of the Western Wall in their tourism advertisement that they were using on their planes and stuff, claiming that the holy site is technically not located within the country's borders. Because they say, now, what does the travel agency got to do with Israel and Jerusalem? But they canceled Israel's ad. So guess what, folks? On April the 14th, the second eruption in Iceland happened, leading to the total disruption of British and European air travel. The volcano affected 1 million British travelers. 105,000 flights were canceled. 8 million passengers were affected. The airline lost $1.7 billion. Worldwide travel was severely disrupted. And you know how I look at this, folks? I look at it this way. The British airliners removes Israel from the map, so God says, hey, you know what? I'm going to move the British Airlines from the sky. Just don't go messing with Israel. And it says the whole world would rise against it. Well, let me just tell you. What does it say? All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. Which leads us, folks, to this whole thing that I thought was very, very interesting. When on March the 11th, and I want you to remember these dates, March the 11th, the Japan earthquake was considered one of the largest earthquakes in history of all time. Now, why that's interesting is because I remember Carolyn and I were returning back from somewhere, and obviously Carolyn has to drive now all the time. And so I'm listening to the news. I always like to listen to news at the top of the hour. And they were talking about the earthquake, so I was very interested in this. And they quoted the mayor of Tokyo. And how that he said he believed that this was the judgment of God. I looked at Carolyn and I said, did you hear that? She said, yeah. I said, who did they say said that? Of course, it went so fast I was half paying attention, but when he said that, I thought, wow, who was that? Well, I spent a long time trying to find it because what ended up happening is after he had made the statement, there was so much pressure that came from the governmental leaders in Tokyo and in Japan that he had to make the next day a public apology for saying that he believed, and you can find on this is on Newsvine, for example, I found it, that the governor of Tokyo said that the earthquake, the tsunami, the subsequent nuclear meltdown that followed was, quote, divine punishment from heaven. Now, I want to tell you why I think this is interesting. Now, I want you to listen to this date. March the 11th last year, Japan, of all people, decided they were going to jump on the bandwagon. They made an official statement. You can go to their website. You can type in, this is a copy and paste from their website right there. Just type in Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. It'll take you to the government's official website. They have all this stuff on record. Here's how it reads. The official statement regarding the construction in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. It was made on March the 11th. Remember that date, 2010. Here's what it says. Quote, the government of Japan deplores the decision of the government of Israel to give permission for construction of 1,600 housing units in East Jerusalem and an additional 1,200 units in the West Bank just after Israeli-Palestinian leadership accepted the start of indirect talks. The government of Japan does not recognize any act that prejudices the final status of Jerusalem and the territories in the pre-1967 borders.